Over the last couple of weeks, I have been talking about the ways in which we lose ourselves. We talked about what happens when we become so focused on maintaining a connection with another that we begin to abandon ourselves, lose ourselves, and we end up feeling disconnected at the end of the day. And last week, we talked about what's underneath that behavior because usually we're not shrinking, accommodating, or over functioning or saying yes when we really want to say no because we're weak. It's not because we're weak. There's often this fear underneath. It's a fear that says, if I really show up as myself, will you still love me? Will you stay? Will you be disappointed in me? Will you be angry? Will I feel like I belong? Hey, and welcome to Masks Off Inner Freedom for People Pleasers and Perfectionists. This is a podcast for those who are tired of holding it all together. I'm Kim Gross, your host. And if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, but still feel anxious, disconnected, or quietly burned out, you're in the right place. Here we talk about the patterns you don't even realize you're living inside of: self abandonment, over functioning, chasing approval, and mistaking productivity for your worth, and more. This isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before you learned to perform, perfect, and please to belong. Each week, we'll slow things down. We'll unpack the nervous system, the inner critic, and the subtle ways that you learned to disconnect from your true self so you can stop living from pressure and start living from presence. This is your space to take the masks off. So let's begin. I know this is going to be a tough pill to swallow, but eventually there comes a point in this work where understanding why we do what we do is no longer enough. And eventually we have to ask the question, now that I see my pattern, now that I see where I'm wearing a mask, what am I going to do differently? How will I show up differently? And that is where radical responsibility comes into play. I actually believe that this is probably one of the most important steps in becoming free to become your true self. We cannot become free when we're waiting for everyone else around us to change. That keeps us stuck in victimhood. Giving away your power to someone else doesn't always look like this big, dramatic, obvious thing. Sometimes giving your power away to another can sound like this: I can't say that because she will get upset with me. I have to go because they'll be disappointed if I'm not home soon. When he says certain things to me in a certain way, I feel terrible about myself. I can't be around those people because they upset me. If I set a boundary with her, I know she's going to yell or get mad. Once they change and do what I need them to do, then I'll feel okay. Other people absolutely do have an effect or an impact on us. I'm not saying that we have to live in a vacuum. People can hurt us. They do betray us. They do criticize. They do judge. They do act like assholes at times. Radical responsibility does not mean that we pretend that harmful behavior is okay. It's very important that I make that clear. It just means noticing what happens after the person behaves in a harmful way or in a bad way. Because there is a subtle difference between this person is treating me in a way that hurts, and because this person is behaving this way, I have no choice but to abandon myself. It's in the second one that we start losing our power. So, a very simple example of where this may have showed up is that maybe someone is disappointed with you because you said no. Their disappointment belongs to them. But your inner controller steps in and she says, fix it, change it, make them happy, or explain yourself. Say what they want to hear. Do whatever you have to do so that they aren't upset with you. And suddenly, their emotional state becomes more important than the relationship with yourself. That's the moment that we are talking about today. And I think that when people hear the word responsibility, they immediately assume now everything is their fault. No. Radical responsibility is the opposite of blame, right? Blame says, whose fault is this? Responsibility asks, what is mine to own? There's such a huge difference. So maybe someone speaks to you in a disrespectful, hurtful, degrading way. The way that they behave, that's theirs. But your responsibility may be in deciding on how the conversation continues. Maybe your partner is disappointed in a choice that you're making. Maybe you're choosing to go on a girls' weekend trip and your partner is really disappointed. The disappointment belongs to your partner. That's theirs. Your responsibility might be in tolerating the discomfort of knowing that you disappointed your partner, and yet you still go on the girls' weekend. Please go on the girls' trip. Maybe somebody doesn't understand what you're trying to share, especially if you're sharing something that's vulnerable and close to your heart and they don't understand you. The fact that they don't understand or their interpretation is theirs. Your responsibility is in resisting the urge to try to get that person to understand you and to see it from your standpoint so that they can maybe even approve of you. Maybe somebody leaves you. Maybe it's a friendship. A friend decides to no longer be friends with you, or your partner, after 30 years, decides to leave. The decision to leave is theirs. Your responsibility is to show up for you in the best way that you can as you grieve that loss. That's the power. Not controlling the other person or what happens. It's not about begging the person to stay or making the person understand you. It's none of that. The power is in refusing to abandon yourself because of what happened. So this is where it gets hard and tricky. And this sounds really empowering when I talk about it in theory, right? But it's actually so much harder in reality. It's so much harder to play it out. It's easier said than done because radical responsibility asks us to give up one of our strategies that we've relied on for years. One of our strategies that has been a tried and true strategy or adaptation, which is trying to control the other person's response. It has seemed or felt as if it was so much easier to just control the other person. Think about how much energy we spend doing that. I know I have spent countless hours doing that, that added up to weeks, months, years of my life trying to control another person's response, another person's actions, behaviors. We may have spent time softening what we really want to say. We may have rehearsed conversations, manipulate timing. We explain ourselves in 10 different ways. We might have anticipated their reaction. And underneath all of that is often, how do I manage you so that I can feel safe? But real freedom comes when we say, I'm going to let you have your reaction. It doesn't mean that I don't care about you. It doesn't mean that I'm being selfish or that I'm being insensitive. It just means that I stop believing that your reaction, your response determines whether I'm allowed to honor myself. For years of my marriage, I tried so hard to get my husband to change how he shows up at times, to get him to be less judgmental, less critical with the children when they were young. And it literally felt like at times that we were speaking two different languages. And it was as if the sky is blue, but I wanted the sky to be orange. I wanted it to change and be orange. Well, the sky will never be orange. It's always going to be blue. So I was looking at my relationship with my husband in the same way. I wanted him to be something other than what he was. And as long as I stayed in that place of making him be the villain than I was the victim. And once I learned and realized that I was in this victimhood place and that it was up to me to take the responsibility to show up differently, to change how I reacted, how I responded, because I knew I could not change or control him. So once I started to realize that, I started slowly but surely taking my power back and no longer expecting him to be different. I had to be different. I had to show up differently by setting a boundary, speaking up and saying that I would not tolerate any poor behavior, or I would not tolerate being talked to in a certain way or the kids in a certain way, and that I would get up and walk away if he started. So I had to take the responsibility of setting boundaries and deal with my own fear of setting the boundary and my discomfort around how he would respond when I would set those boundaries. So again, the work is not in getting the person to change. The work is noticing what is happening inside of me when he didn't show up the way I wanted him to. So here's a question that changes everything. It's the one question to come back to over and over. And it will be so helpful for you moving forward. The question is, what is mine to own? Not what's wrong with me or how do I fix them? How do I get them to change? Or who's the one that's wrong in this? Who's the bad guy? Just simply, what is mine to own? And this, again, as I shared in the last episode, is the second step of my 5-step power pathway, which, by the way, I do also use this 5-step power pathway as my framework for my book, Free to Be, where I share my own personal journey of how I went from being in this victim place to having more freedom to be my true self and how I used the power pathway. Before we keep going, I want to take a moment to share something really close to my heart. If you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking, wow, this feels familiar, the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the constant self pressure, I wrote a book just for you. It's called Free to Be, A Pathway to Inner Liberation, and it's part memoir, part healing guide. I share my own journey of learning how to stop living in victimhood, take off the masks, and come home to myself, but not by fixing myself, by understanding my patterns with compassion. This isn't a book full of fluff or quick fixes. It's honest, it's grounding, and it's for anyone who's ready to live with more peace and freedom. You can find Free to Be on Amazon. And if the book resonates with you, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave a review. Even a few words can really help others to find it. So O is ownership. It's the moment that we stop making our ability to be free dependent on what other people say and do. So let me explain what that can look like. Instead of saying they make me feel like I can't be myself, you can ask yourself the question, Where am I editing myself because I'm afraid of their reaction, or I'm afraid of what they would say or do next? Instead of saying, my husband doesn't respect my boundaries, I can ask the question, what am I willing to follow through on when my boundary isn't respected? Am I willing to get up and walk away from him? Instead of, my kids expect too much from me, where am I continuing to say yes when I want to say no? I mean, that is just like so eye opening, right? Instead of thinking, oh, my kids just expect everything from me, they want so much from me. Okay, well, how did we get to that place to begin with? Because I kept saying yes all the time when I wanted to say no. Instead of saying they make me feel guilty, you can ask the question, can I allow guilt to be present without automatically feeling that I'm inherently wrong or bad, or without going to the place of changing my decision? Instead of they won't change, you can ask, if they never change, ever, what choice do I want to make, or what choice can I make? And that's a powerful one, especially for those of us that are in long-term relationships and we have spent years, decades of trying to change our partner and they don't change. They're the same person today as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Instead of continuing for the next 20 years of trying to make your partner change, ask yourself, what choice do you have? You can choose to accept your partner fully and stay in the relationship. You can say, you know what? I can no longer accept this person. And so therefore I'm leaving. You can also say that I understand that my partner hasn't changed up until this point, and there are infinite possibilities for the future. I have no idea whether he or she will change in the future, but what I do know is I can keep working on myself and I can take what I like and then leave the rest, which just means I can appreciate my partner for what he brings to the table. Radical responsibility brings the focus back to us. And given what is actually true in our reality, in our situations, how do I want to live? Do I want to stay in victimhood? Do I want to stay feeling powerless or helpless? Or do I want to change how I see things and change my perspective and live more freely? So here's a simple practice that you can use this week if you choose. When you find yourself feeling triggered or activated by another person, you can divide the situation into three categories. The first category is what belongs to them, what belongs to that person. So it's their feelings, their choices, their opinions, their disappointment, their perspective of you, the way they receive you, whether or not they change, whether they understand you, whether they approve. 2, what belongs to you? Your choices, your boundaries, your behaviors, how you speak. Are you being honest? Are you taking off your mask? Are you choosing to stay? Are you choosing to leave? Whether or not you do abandon yourself to keep the peace. And then 3, the third is, what do I have to be willing to feel? What do I have to be willing to feel? That's the hard part. And it's the part that we skip because it's so hard. We avoid pain. Remember, we're always being hardwired to avoid pain. So, because reclaiming your power will sometimes mean that you're going to have to feel some guilt. You're going to have to feel discomfort. You cannot avoid it. You might feel anxiety. You might feel sadness. Maybe you have to feel some grief, some loss, tolerating somebody else's disappointment of you. And certainly, it might mean that you have to feel uncertainty. What does this mean for the future of this relationship? That can be scary because you don't know whether that person's going to reject you or no longer want you, need you, spend time with you. And once again, if you're new to this podcast, then I'm sharing that the third step of my 5-step power pathway is W. It is the willingness to feel. And it comes after ownership because first we take ownership of our part in it, and then we have the willingness to feel. You cannot consistently choose yourself if you're unwilling to feel what choosing yourself sometimes costs. And that does not mean that every relationship is going to end. It's not, it's the opposite. Because healthy relationships actually become more real, more authentic, because now there are two people participating instead of one person participating and one carefully constructed person wearing a mask. This whole entire month has been leading us up to this point. First, we notice the ways in which we disappear. And then we can get curious about why some part of us learned that disappearing might keep us safe or it keeps us connected. And then eventually we arrive here to this moment. I understand why I learned to abandon myself. I don't want to keep doing that anymore because it doesn't feel good. And you don't have to wait for someone else to become more accepting before you can become more authentic. You don't have to wait for someone else to stop being disappointed before you make a decision that is right for you. You don't have to wait until no one judges you, because that's not going to happen, or misunderstands you, or gets angry with you, or leaves you. Because that version of freedom would still put your life in everybody else's hands. On the other hand, real freedom sounds like this. You are allowed to be who you are, and I'm allowed to be who I am. You are responsible for your relationship with yourself, and I am responsible for mine. And when I stop making you responsible for whether I'm allowed to be myself, I reclaim my power. So this week, I invite you to notice one place where you have been waiting for another person to change before giving yourself permission to change. And you can ask yourself, what does belong to them? What belongs to me? And maybe most importantly, what feeling would I have to be willing to experience in order to stop abandoning myself? And that's the hard part. And I so get you. I so feel you if you're thinking to yourself, it's just so hard, Kim. It's just so hard to make the change. And I know because I have done the work, I can still go to the place of struggling. And it's not like you arrive on some type of mountaintop and all of a sudden it's easy peasy. It gets easier each and every time that you take your power back, but it can still be a challenge. And if you're thinking to yourself, you don't want to do this work alone, I hear you. And that's what I'm here for. I can be your guide. I can support you. I can hold space for you and help remind you of how worthy you are, how valuable you are, and that you matter enough to be able to take your power back. So if you are sitting here listening and you've made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much. And secondly, if you are thinking to yourself that you no longer want to be a victim, you don't want to play the role of victim, you want to reclaim your power, then I invite you to reach out to me. You can email me. All of my information is on my website. It's just my name, kimgrosscoaching.com. And you can find all the ways there to connect with me. So this is your opportunity to walk through the doorway to freedom, because becoming free to be your true self is not about creating a life where no one ever disappoints you. It's about becoming someone who no longer disappears when they are. So be free, become free to be your true self. As we wrap up today's episode, I just want to say thank you for being here and for taking this time for yourself. If this episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe to the podcast or leave a review. Even a quick star rating helps more people find this space and reminds the algorithms that these conversations matter. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have a question, a takeaway, or something that came up while you were listening, leave a comment or send it in. Let's keep the conversation going. This podcast isn't meant to be a one-way street. It's meant to feel like a community. If you want to learn more about me, my work, or the ways we can go deeper together, you can visit my website. All the details are there. Until next time, take a breath, take the mask off, and be gentle with yourself. I'll see you soon.